Hey folks, I've got something here that I want to share with you, and it's going to knock your socks off. We're going to take a time warp back to a textbook in 1875 on civil government. And what you're going to see in this book is going to take you aback a bit. The light, I think, will go on. It is so simple, so clear-cut, so straightforward, and it will explain an awful lot to you. And so I know that the title, dealing with civil government, is not the least bit sexy. It's not particularly attractive. It doesn't really have a hook, and so it goes against all of the knowledge in sales and marketing that I've ever learned. But the content, I think, will blow you away. And it will certainly explode the heads of the liberals, the neocons, the teachers' unions, and school boards, not only across the country, but around the world. Okay, so this isn't going to be too terribly long. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you the first two chapters. The chapters are only a couple pages, 2-3 pages, all right? And it's a fascinating book. This was written again in 1875 by George Martin, as you see here, who was a teacher of history and civil polity in the State Normal School. What was the State Normal School? In Bridgewater, Massachusetts. I did a little research, and there were several state normal schools, and this was an actual school that taught young children, typically in grades 6 through 9, I believe, middle school, all right? But it was also a school where they trained student teachers. So they trained students to become teachers who are going into the public school system. Now again, this isn't private school. This was the public school system at the time. So it was a school for teachers where they were actually an apprentice, all right? And so that was the purpose of this textbook. It was a textbook for teachers to use in learning how to teach and at the same time teaching the children in their classes, all right? That's what the State Normal School was. It was originally founded in 1840, and you can find information on that if you want to on the web, all right? What we're going to do here is I'm going to read to you the text. You can read along with me if you want to watch the video, or if you're busy and just want to listen while you're doing other things, you can do that. Come back and read it yourself later on, okay? So I'll try to be as clear as I can if you're only listening. All right, so let's take a look here and see what we have. All right, this particular book apparently was the book of Lucy LaFleur from Denison, Texas. And can't say that that's really a Texas cowboy name, Lucy LaFleur, but that's he signed it here, and apparently that was the owner of the book at the time. This actually fell out of the book. This was a clipping. It's actually a magazine clipping. On the back of this graphic was an article, and bits and pieces of an article that I was reading, but this gives you a sense of the times that this book was written, and I thought that was quite interesting. Really kind of took me back looking at their knickers and their shoes and how they dressed in that time. But just to give you a flavor, let me read to you part of the article that was on the back of this. Again, just to kind of give you a flavor for things, and I can't read you the whole article, it's just about one paragraph, but it'll, again, give you a sense of the time, okay? "Goodness," says Mrs. Carey again. An amused smile overspread her face. "Why, you seem as much interested as he." "Oh, I have to be," said Mrs. Arden. "When you have a boy," she smiled warmly in return. "Must you leave us here?" "I'm afraid so," returned the other, with a nod of farewell. In addition to the excitement of making those darling little frocks, another had presented itself. She would manage to freeze some ice cream for dinner to surprise Granville with on a Monday. This was a particular reason why, just at present, it has been said before that all paths of interest led to the masculine presence of her husband at the end of them. Under all the other excitement, there was always the deep, unending excitement of being married to him. No 2 days in love's calendar are ever alike. Sometimes he loved the most, and sometimes she loved the most. The times, exquisite and not to be forgotten, when, Hibernianly speaking, they both loved the most, were the rare and fleeting moments for which one lived. She was bountiful in her largeness of liberty to him. She couldn't tie him down to her restrictions as a mother. She respected his individuality. All she asked of him, delicately, without asking it, was that he simply shouldn't leave her out of anything that she could do. She never reproached Granville if he failed her. She instead excused him to himself. That's as far as it goes before it gets cut off. I just found that interesting to grasp the concept of what they're describing here as a great relationship, apparently. Looking at this, again, she was bountiful in her largeness of liberty to him. She couldn't tie him down to her restrictions as a mother. She respected his individuality. All she asked of him delicately, without asking it, was that she simply couldn't leave her out of anything that she could do. Apparently talking about her son, and also Granville, who was the husband. Just kind of framing what appears to be an ideal relationship, and how she definitely was not overbearing, not terribly demanding, certainly giving the son the liberty to do as he wished, working as hard as she could to please her husband. So anyway, just a little time capsule. So let's go on with the book. Okay, this was entered according to an act of Congress in the year 1875 by George Martin in the office of the Librarian of Congress at Washington. Okay, so in the preface, he's talking about the book and what he intends for it for the teachers that he will be teaching with the book. Okay, quoting, "The attention of teachers is invited to the 5 distinctive features of this book. Feature number 1, its full statement of principles. A knowledge of these principles will be found of value not only in studying our own institutions, but also in studying ancient and modern history. They furnish a standard by which to test the various governments that have existed, and often explain the influence that those governments have exerted. Feature number 2, its comprehensive plan. Embracing the state, county, city, and town organizations, as well as that of the United States. As every citizen takes part more directly in the local administration than in that of the general government, he needs to understand the powers and relations of the state and municipal governments. Feature number 3, its historical method. The endeavor has been to show not only what our free institutions are, but why they are, by tracing their development from germs in the early English Constitution through the colonial and revolutionary periods of our own history. Feature number 4, its topical arrangement. The teacher will find this is a help in assigning lessons and the scholar in studying and remembering them. 5, its omission of details. A school textbook on this subject should not be a compendium of political statistics nor an office holder's guide, but a citizen's manual. Experience has shown that young men and women from 15 to 20 years of age may become deeply interested in the study of civil polity if the teacher is interested and knows the subject. The best results in knowledge and discipline are attained by making the class exercise one of discussion rather than of mere recitation. It's not intended that the chapters on the colonial governments should be committed, but read in the classroom and compared, and a summary made of their general features. Every school should have among its reference books a copy of the general statutes, the acts and resolves of the legislature, and a law dictionary. As parts 3 and 4 of the book are themselves summaries of the constitutions of the state and the United States, summaries at the end of the chapters are omitted. Bridgewater, August 1875. All right. That's quite interesting, don't you think, that he feels that every school should have among its reference books a copy of the general statutes, the acts and resolves of legislature, and a law dictionary. Amazing. Think of how knowledgeable our kids might be if they had access to that at a young age. Why do you think that would be important? I think it's obvious that for a free republic to be successful, he's saying that the citizens must be involved at the local level. And in order to be involved, you must be knowledgeable on how the system works, which is why he wrote this book. It's a citizen's manual on how government works. And only with that knowledge can the citizen be actively involved in influencing the direction of his local government. Where do we find ourselves today? Kids come out of school, they don't know a dang thing about any of this stuff. They don't know how the government works. They probably couldn't name who the vice president is. Wouldn't know where to find the state constitution. All right? And we wonder why government is such a mess. Okay, so we can see right off the bat why we have a disconnect today, because we're not following the guidelines that Mr. Martin gave us in 1875. Okay? Now, this book gets into all kinds of interesting subjects. You can see here the first part of the contents, the source of authority in the state, the government, its functions and departments, forms of governments, and means by which they are limited, obligations of the government, the nature and duties of citizenship. He gets into the establishment of civil, religious, and political liberty, talking about the colonies, the New England Confederacy, colonies of New York and New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, southern colonies, then the Declaration of Independence, establishment of state governments, the legislative, executive, and judicial departments, counties, townships, cities, and villages, elections and nominations, ordinance of 1787. Then he gets into a section on the constitutional government of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution, and other subjects. I'm not going to read all of them, but that gives you an idea. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. So let's just delve into the first few pages. I'm just going to share the first few pages with you here, and this is important, and I want you to pay close attention, because this will set the stage for a series that I'll be doing on this book as a means of distributing this treasure. This book just fell into my lap. It was pure happenstance. It literally just fell into my lap. And it is such a treasure, you'll see for yourself. So let's continue. All right, Chapter 1, Civil Government in the United States. Definition of terms. The word govern is derived from the Latin gubernare, meaning to steer, to pilot, and then to guide, direct, control. To govern, therefore, is to control, and government is control. Thus, the divine government is the control exercised by the Creator over his creatures. Family government is the control exercised by the head of a family over its members. School government is the control exercised by the teacher over the members of the school. When a pilot would guide his vessel from one port to another, he must know what courses he may take. He must choose one of these, and he must have the means of compelling the ship to take this course. These three things, intelligence, will, and power, are necessary to all control, and therefore to all government. When the controlling will expresses its choice, says what it would have done, this expression becomes a rule of action for the governed. This rule of action is to be followed until there is a new and different choice expressed. This expression of the controlling will is a law, and government is control exercised by means of the establishment and enforcement of laws. Thus, a father chooses to have his children rise at a certain hour in the morning and retire at a certain hour in the evening. He tells them plainly what he would have them do, and this expression of his will becomes a law of the family, and remains so without a new expression until he chooses to set aside the rule. Okay? Clear example of what is a law. Let's back up a second. I'm going to pause and make some comments here. Right in the very first page of chapter 1, he illustrates how control is exerted in 3 groups. The first group is by the Creator over his creatures, the supreme lawmaker, the origin of universal law, natural law. Okay? Group number 2 is family government, where the control is exercised by the head of the family. Group number 3 is the school government, where the control is exercised by the teacher over the members. And I think it's interesting to note that these 3 are highlighted and really intertwined. And as we see, it's kind of a hierarchy of government, that it all starts with the Creator, passes through to the family, and from the family then delegates authority to the school to further educate the children. And I've talked about this hierarchy of order in my book, One Freeman's War and the Second American Revolution, and other presentations that I've done, so you may have seen that. So, right off the bat, this author recognizes that all authority originates from the Creator, is delegated to the family and then to the school. And this is the organic hierarchy of authority and of all law. Okay? So, with that point made, let's continue. And I quote, "But the mere expression of the will may not ensure control. The child needs to feel that he must obey. This feeling can only come when a penalty is connected with disobedience. This penalty consists in the infliction of pain in one form or another. Thus, the father says that the child who disobeys the rule shall lose a part of his play hour. But saying this will do no good unless the child is sure that the father will do as he says. There must be a certainty that the penalty will be inflicted. The difference between civil government and the others mentioned above is indicated in the meaning of the word civil. This is derived from the Latin civilis, pertaining to citizens, and a citizen is a member of a state or nation. The following definition of a state is nearly complete, taken from Wolseley's International Law. Quote, "A state is a community of persons living within certain limits of a territory," make a note of that, certain limits of a territory under a permanent organization, which aims to secure the prevalence of justice by self-imposed laws. End quote. Okay, now the text continues, some would insert after justice and otherwise promote the commonwealth. Okay, so he's saying that a state is a community of persons living within certain limits of territory under a permanent organization which aims to secure the prevalence of the promotion of the commonwealth or the prevalence of justice by self-imposed laws. Okay? If we examine this definition, we see that the state does not consist of those who directly exercise power, not the king, not Congress, not those who vote, but all the people in a community. The definition excludes wandering tribes of men, and all corporations which have no limits of territory, and whose object is not justice. If all the laws of the state are self-imposed, that is, if there is no power outside its body of people which dictates to it in any way, the state is said to be sovereign. This word does not admit of comparison. One state cannot be more sovereign than another, and a small state, in this respect, stands on an equality with a large one. The sovereignty of a state consists in the absolute right to control its own members and in the absolute right to resist any interference in its affairs by any other state. The first of these rights constitutes its internal sovereignty. The second, its external sovereignty. From these statements, it will be seen that Boston is not a state, that Massachusetts is not a sovereign state. The United States is a sovereign state or nation. Great Britain and Russia are both sovereign states. Having now defined a state, we are prepared to define civil government as control by law exercised by the state over its members as such. Comments. So he's talking about sovereignty, internal sovereignty, a right for a state to control its own members internally, and external sovereignty, the right basically not to be imposed upon by any external forces. So what he's saying really is that the states have internal sovereignty, but not external sovereignty, because international affairs are managed by the United States of America as a federation of states. We won't get into those discussions or definitions. I know you know a lot about that, but that's not the point of what we're getting into here. So I would contend that based on what he's saying here is that states really are not sovereign because they can have laws imposed on them externally, which is from the federal powers, the federal legislature, right? So couldn't we say the same thing then when we hear people talking about sovereign citizens? If we accept the premises that what Mr. Martin is talking about here, that all authority flows from God, God to man and man to the schools and the state, that it reminds me of the scripture in the Bible that basically states that men shall be either slaves to men or to God. That we are ruled and governed by one set of laws or the other. In the ideal situation, what Mr. Martin is saying here is that our government is merely an extension of God's law, the universal law, and operates in accordance and in harmony with those principles. And I think we can look at that in 1 Romans 10, talking about, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, for all government authority is established by God. And I would take issue with that translation from the standpoint that I would insert the word legitimate authority. There are legitimate authorities, there are illegitimate authorities. And I won't get into that discussion. That's a whole nother discussion about give unto Caesar. But if government is legitimate, it operates in harmony with God's laws. Okay? You draw your own conclusions from there. And that's what Mr. Martin is saying. So, in summary, he tells us, point number 1, government is control. Number 2, intelligence, will, and power are necessary to government. Intelligence to create the infrastructure for government, the will to carry it out, and the power to enforce it are necessary to government. Okay? Number 3, laws are expressions of the controlling will, which become rules of action for the governed. And 4, a law to secure control must be accompanied by a penalty and a certainty that the penalty will be inflicted. Number 5, a state is a community of persons living within certain limits of a territory under a permanent organization which aims to secure the prevalence of justice by self-imposed laws. We create those laws ourselves, don't we? Through our elected representatives and legislature. Point 6, a sovereign state is one in which all the laws are self-imposed. All the laws, internally and externally. And again, evaluate that from what we understand, so many people making the claim to be sovereign citizens. Point number 7, civil government is controlled by law, exercised by a state over its members. Let's go back and let me just make a couple of comments. Going back to look at the treatment of the penalty, that in order for a law to be effective, there must be certainty that a penalty will be applied. Okay, think in terms of all that goes on in our modern courts today. Doesn't it seem like the penalties are applied to the working people, but they're never applied or rarely applied to the real perpetrators of crimes in high offices? How so many of our public servants are not accountable to the law. Bankers can steal billions of dollars. What do they get? A bailout. Public officials can embezzle billions of dollars. What was it? $4 trillion was missing from the Pentagon budget. Donald Rumsfeld announced one day before 9/11 happened and distracted the world's attention away from his comment. $4 trillion missing from the budget. How do you miss $4 trillion from a budget that's only about $80 billion? Interesting. And we could go on and on about the corruption at the county, state, and municipal levels in the courtrooms, the things that go on, the injustices that occur, how the laws are applied to one class of people, but not applied to the other classes that are actually imposing and exercising and enforcing the laws. So when we no longer have a certainty that the penalty will be inflicted, then we really don't have a law. A law is only a law if there's certainty that the penalty will be inflicted equally. And when it's not, people lose faith in the system. So, an interesting comparison. Tells us an awful lot about our modern day society when we look back at the simplicity of how civil government is presented by Mr. Martin. Next, he also talks about how the laws and government itself applies not to those in high office or who execute or implement legislation, the king, Congress, not even those who vote, but all the people. All the people are responsible for this, a community. And this is obviously why he says that every schoolroom should have the acts of the legislature and the statutes along with the law dictionary. All the community must be involved in the government. All the community is responsible for the government. How many people in your community don't have a clue what's going on in government? Could this be the reason why we're in the mess that we're in? Think about that. Now, let's look at chapter 2. This starts to get pretty interesting. The source of authority in the state. So we start out. The question naturally arises, what right has the state to control me? Why may I not do as I please? To answer this question, we must learn how the state comes to exist. The members of the state are human beings, and they are therefore social beings. They are created with a nature which only the society of fellow beings can satisfy. They are made to love and hate and fear, and they must have those near them upon whom to exercise these feelings. They have thoughts and language to express them, and they must be with those who can understand their language and respond to their thoughts. If a man lives alone, all these human faculties become dwarfed and stunted for want of exercise, and he is not so much of a man as he might have been. All experience shows that the highest degree of manhood can be attained only in society. If a man lives alone, all these human faculties become dwarfed and stunted for want of exercise, and he is not so much of a man as he might have been. All experience shows that the highest degree of manhood can be attained only in society, and that out of it man grows brutish. A life of solitude, like that of a hermit, always seems unnatural and undesirable. There are stories of human beings who have been exposed in infancy and have grown up among the brutes, and they are found to have lost the human likeness. They walk upon their hands and feet. Their language consists of inarticulate cries and noises. They are afraid of men. Instead of human reason, they have only the instinct of the brute. Centuries ago, Aristotle wrote, "Whoever lives voluntarily out of civil society must have a vicious disposition, or be an existence superior to man." End quote. Society, then, is a necessity to man, both for his preservation and for his happiness. But there are two causes, either of which would make society a failure. Men are selfish, as well as social. Every man has a disposition, more or less strong, to have his own way, and these ways necessarily conflict with each other. If the strongest should succeed, the weak would suffer. Hence quarrels would arise, and society would become a scene of strife and confusion. And the very thing which was designed to preserve human life and be a means of good to men would come to be a source of evil. When men come together in society, they have common wants, which they cannot satisfy as individuals. For instance, the common defense must be provided for. Roads and bridges must be built. Money must be coined. Men are not only selfish, but they differ in ability to judge wisely. And it would be impossible for all to agree as to the best time and way of doing these things. They would therefore remain undone. To remedy these two evils, society must organize itself permanently, first to control the evil inclined and protect the weak, and then to devise and carry out plans for the common necessity and convenience. Society is so organized as a state, and the control which it exercises is civil government. The origin of this is evident. It is a necessity of society, and society is a necessity of man's nature. We are now prepared to answer the question as to the authority of the state. Since civil government is necessary in order that the ends for which society exists may be secured, and since these ends are determined by the nature of man as created, it follows that government comes from God, and that the state derives its authority from Him. Men in society find themselves under a law of their nature, which bids them organize and govern. As in every other case, they are free to obey or disobey, being answerable only to God, who has made the law. But if they disobey, they suffer the consequences. They have no security for life and property. Virtue and intelligence are wanting. Vice and crime prevail. In a word, they are savages. And sooner or later, they become the prey of some society which has better fulfilled the end of its creation. All history is full of illustrations of this truth. Our own Indian tribes bear witness that men cannot violate this first duty of society with impunity. Government, therefore, is a trust committed to society by the Creator. And society must not only accept the trust, but it is responsible for the way in which it executes it. It is in duty bound to have the best possible government, though what this shall be, it may determine for itself. Wow. Summary. Number 1, men are social beings, therefore society is a necessity. 2, men are selfish and differ in opinion, therefore government is necessary. 3, the state derives its authority from God. 4, society is under a law requiring it to establish government. 5, civil government is a trust for which society is responsible to God. Now, these are some important concepts. And many of us have been learning some ancillary subject matter in terms of where all authority flows from. And here it is in black and white in a textbook teaching student teachers how to teach their children when they get into the public school system. Now, we all know the liberal extremists, progressives in this country really, in most cases, are godless. Or, in the best case scenario, they give it lip service. Who would admit today, in public, in the public media, involved with the school system, that we need to teach our children that all authority flows from God and that the authority of government comes from God? Now, we can clearly see the reasoning behind the fact that men are social beings, society is a necessity to manage our affairs, to achieve a level of justice, to have some security and protection, to protect our peace, our security, our property, our ability and freedoms, to move forward in life, to build a life, to build an estate, to build a family, all under the auspices of God. It's clear to see that, yes, government is absolutely necessary. Now, many of us would probably take issue with what type of government or how government is being administered today. But I think most of us could probably agree and are working hard to get to the point where we can move the management of our public affairs as administered by the government back to the way it was in 1875, where we recognized that all law and government must be in harmony with the universal law which comes from God. This is what the Republic was based on. This is how the country, the United States of America, was founded. And you can argue that all you like, but you get absolutely nowhere because the history books are full of direct references. I would point you to the Christian history of the United States of America. There's also a book you can find on Amazon called The Christian History of the Revolution. And these books are compilations of excerpts taken from the original writings back in the pre-colonial, colonial, and revolutionary times from the people that actually lived and were leading and were promoting the principles of freedom based on these fundamental concepts. Now, looking at the statement that civil government is a trust for which society is responsible to God, many of us are studying and coming to learn of the existence of the Sestique Trust and how we, in fact, are beneficiaries of that. That is actually an entity created through fraud and deception, contrary to our interests. That's not what we're talking about here. But civil government, meaning government civilis, for the people, of the people, government is the people, needs to be in harmony with the universal law, and in that, it's a responsibility created by way of trust that God has endowed us with that trust, basically with giving us dominion over the earth and everything in the earth. And it's our responsibility as administrators for that trust to manage it properly. And for all of us who consider ourselves to be good, honorable people of whatever faith, I'm Christian, so I talk about being the Christian faith. And that's really what the author is talking about here. So we'll keep it in that context. A lot of us think of ourselves as being responsible, upstanding people, but I would ask you the question, what have you done personally to live up to your personal responsibility for the proper management of that trust? We can see in this book, the author feels every citizen must be a part of his community, and that community is the one to administer the government. The community is the people. That is the civil government. It's not lawyers. It's not elected officials. These are functionaries to perform specific roles. Government requires involvement and direction from the community. That means you. You're a part of the community. That's where we have fallen down and abdicated our personal responsibility, and that's why we have the mess that we have today. Join us in the Law Club to learn how to protect and preserve your peace, prosperity, and liberty.